Illinois. Just 1 second. This is okay. This is Illinois at Columbia University in New York, welcoming you to a joint seminar of the International Media Management Academic Association, IMMAA, as well as the Columbia Institute for Teleinformation, which I'm directing, and Jason Buckwitz is the associate director and the executive director, and I thank him for managing and organizing this. Similarly, I thank Mercedes for organizing the session itself, and I will introduce her in a moment. The topic is, of course, something that we all know about and care about, namely the trust in media. We are media scholars, and it is important to us that the subject of our research has a certain credibility. But we can also ask the question, why do we care about whether media is credible or not? Is it not possible that the whole issue of trust in media is a media event itself? That it is perhaps a bit of a media navel gazing on its own and reflecting its own sense of self-importance, rather than that it reflects a particular societal problem. It is true, of course, that media trust has declined enormously, whereas somewhere in the 60s and 50s and 60s and 70s, media were probably, in America now, among the most trusted of institutions. They have plummeted now, and they're kind of in the neighborhood as low as Congress's trustworthiness is, which is pretty much at the bottom of all institutions in America. So media and Congress are competing for lack of trust, and maybe the reasons are intertwined, and perhaps they're almost even the same reasons. And we will hear from Francisco what he thinks about it. He, of course, is also quite knowledgeable about the United States of America. He has been here in New York for several years, I believe, or run the program for several years of his university in New York. So the trustworthiness index of American media has kind of plummeted, and it is now among Republicans only 12%. It is higher among Democrats. I think it's somewhere in 37 or something like that percent, which is not really great either, or 47. But it also, that imbalance also tells us that conservatives, Republicans, have more of a problem with media than Republicans, and it behooves us perhaps kind of to think about why that is so, why we should not expect the distrust or trust to be more evenly distributed across the political spectrum. Because realistically, historically, trust in media is an anomaly. It's something that is more associated with scarce media, of the kind of broadcast media, television media in particular, of the 50s and 60s, et cetera, where there was very little television. And so television had to kind of in news had to cover a broad spectrum of opinion from left to right and everybody under the tent. And for newspapers, it was also similar, because most American cities had only one newspaper. Virtually all American cities had only one newspaper, and so that newspaper had to covered a very broad spectrum. And in that sense, it was kind of acceptable to both sides of the political spectrum and had trust. As media proliferated, it became more niche-y, and people found a lot of stuff there that they disagreed with, but they could also find something that they agreed with violently. And that, on some level, has been the model, at least from the newspaper press in America, and I believe also in most European countries, for decades, if not centuries, before the advent of broadcasting. And so maybe what we're experiencing now is a return to normal. And another observation that, and I hope that Francisco will respond to that. Another point that I would like to make, and then I'll shut up, is the question whether, in fact, and this is a point made by my colleague at the journalism school at Columbia, Michael Schutzen, in one of his recent books, which is that perhaps the fact that people distrust media and have problems with media just shows that media is doing its job, which is to expose, to confront, to criticize, not to be complacent and feel good, but actually to be combative. And yes, they're combative on one side, combative on the other side. So collectively, everybody is upset at something. But people being distrustful of media can also mean that people are reading with a critical mindset, that they kind of don't simply accept the information, but they kind of process it. And they conclude that they don't quite believe it, or they have a different opinion. But that's all signs of a positive democracy rather than a negative statement. And so I'm just throwing these things out for us to discuss, because it's kind of quite easy to get into a rut and say, trust is good, we need more trust, and woe us, and the internet, and social media, and smartphones, and woe us, where are we, and where's democracy? So with those words here, I'd like kind of to pass on to Mercedes Medina Laveron from the University of Navarra, who has been a really good friend over the years and a colleague in many ways. Just a few words about her, but only a few words, because she is one of these people who, when you look at her biography and her list of publications, you say kind of, wow, all these things, and I didn't even know about it. So she has a PhD from Navarra, but also a MA in communications from Westminster University in the UK. She is a full professor at the Marketing and Media Management Department at the University of Navarra. She is also she has many projects, coordinator of the European Horizon 2030 project on resilience, media, democracy. She's also been on the boards of IMMAA, International Media Management Association, and EMMA, the European equivalent. Her teaching is about media economics, media companies, media research. She has more than 100 articles and chapters. She has a dozen books written and co-authored. She has done a lot of research. She has gotten the Best Emma Paper Prize in 2011. She got a Dragos de Latina Prize, and she's got other academic honors, and she honors me with her. ¿No te quedará una lata? And she honors me with her good graces and her friendship. So thank you very much, Mercedes. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That's true. We are very good friends. That's, I think, the most important thing here. Anyway, thank you so much. And we have just written a book together with many other authors that is coming in next August. Anyway, I'm here just to introduce you Francisco Perez-Latre. That's another very good friend of us, and his name is Kiko. We like to call him Kiko. So he's a professor of the School of Communication of the University of Navarra. He currently is the director of our master's program, the graduate programs at the school. And he holds a Master of Arts in Marketing, Communication, and Advertising in Emerson College in Boston. He's also a member of the scientific committee of the IMMAA, the International Media Management Association. He's been a member of the board of the EMMA, the European Media Management Association. And he's written more than 10 books, 35 book chapters, many other articles. But just to summarize his curriculum, I will say that among all the things that he has done, he's a very strong reader. And I think that's very, very, very positive figure right now, because every book that is going there, Kiko has read it. So we can say that he's an intellectual. He has a very deep mind and free mind, that I think that's very important too. So he's a very good talker. No, it's very, very very enlightening to talk with Kiko because he has always many things to say and many deep thoughts to share. So he selected this topic, trust in media. He's been working on that for many years. He's written a book about trust, and it's true, it's a bit provocative, as Ellie was saying before, because the title is Trust in Media Today, but I don't really know if it's a question or an answer or a desideratum, but probably Kiko is going to solve my questions and probably the questions of every one of us. So I think, Kiko, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, first of all, Jason and Ellie, for the invitation. I'm really very honored to be here talking to you. Also, thanks to Mercedes. She's a great scholar. She's also my friend, and her words were very nice. So I really appreciate that too. And my goal today is to have a conversation with you about the erosion of trust in media, its causes, its consequences, and maybe some solutions. I wouldn't like to finish without saying something that could be a venue for solution. And I'm going to use basically my own voice. I'm not going to use any PPT because I think that in that way I'm going to be a bit more free to follow my thoughts. And there was a very famous scholar in trust, and she unfortunately died already in 2021. Her name is Catherine Hawley. And he said with a very good metaphor that sometimes trust is thought of as an emotionally thrilling leap into the dark. It is true that trust makes us vulnerable, but at the same time, distrust is really disappointing. And my point is that that's where we are now in the media. I think that as we move further into the post-COVID era, the distinction between normal operations and crisis management for companies continues to blur. And I think that tomorrow's most successful leaders in the media will be those that can maintain organizational stability while simultaneously driving innovation and change. Trust is going to be a crucial asset to do that. The erosion of trust in the media is a complex issue with significant consequences for our society. It is fair to say that it is part of a larger crisis of trust that affects all social institutions, not only media. There would be more to say about that, but today I have to focus on the media. In my opinion, trust could be considered the fundamental business model for media companies. But in this brief presentation, I would like to outline the causes of this crisis of trust and give or share with you some ideas. And actually, all the things that Ellie said at the beginning were very thought-provoking, and I think that tie very well with some of the points I would like to make. So first, let's look at the causes of declining trust. Certainly, one could be the digital revolution, the rise of social media, smartphones, and other online platforms has in a way upended the authority of traditional media. With digitalization, journalists have become digital intermediaries alongside other digital intermediaries. Professional journalists lose their exclusivity in the dissemination of messages. So that would be the one. Number two, economic pressures. Media organizations are facing increasing financial challenges, leading to cuts in staff and resources, and a decline in the quality of journalism as a consequence. In the media sector, after a transformative economic and advertising crisis, there are companies in a worse financial situation that fight for audiences, often with lower quality content, produced by less experienced and worse paid staff. Number 3 certainly is political polarization. This one, I think, is a bit different in different countries. Certainly, it is so in my country. Media outlets are increasingly catering to specific political viewpoints, leading to a lack of balanced and objective reporting. This is evident in the rise of partisan news outlets and the increasing use of social media to spread political propaganda. Political influencers are becoming a major force as increasingly large audiences live outside the legacy media world. Number 4, misinformation and disinformation. The spread of false and misleading information has become a major problem, eroding trust in all sources of information. The dissemination of disinformation is now at the heart of the debate on fake news, credibility, disinformation, and trust that is already inspiring a significant body of research in our field. Finally, I would also like to talk a bit about talent and culture. The media industry is facing a talent crisis, with many experienced journalists leaving the field. This is due in part to the economic pressures facing media organizations I was mentioning before, as well as the changing nature of the industry. But also, we have to recognize that many media companies have toxic work cultures, which can lead to burnout and dissatisfaction among employees. In the sector of media, communication, and entertainment, companies have difficulties facing this crisis because of the weakness of their business culture, which generates precarious, when not directly toxic, work environments. In that context, our young people do not want to work in the media any longer, which, in a vicious circle, makes young talent even harder to find. So here are the causes. Now, a little bit on the consequences. Certainly, one, moving along the same lines, would be increased political polarization. People are more likely to believe information that confirms their existing biases, leading to greater division and conflict. Number 2, weaken democratic institutions, because a healthy democracy relies on a well-informed citizenry. When people don't trust the media, they are less likely to be informed and engaged in civic life. Number 3, the rise of alternative information sources. People are increasingly turning to alternative sources of information, those echo chambers we are talking so often in the last years. We have social media, we have influencers, which may not be reliable or accurate. Media fragmentation makes us live in separate worlds, and it is harder to find common themes of conversations and shared grounds. Number 4, we have a difficulty in addressing societal challenges. When people don't trust the media, it becomes more difficult to address important challenges in a productive way, like poverty or immigration or unemployment. Real issues that we have a hard time addressing seriously and in a non-partisan way. Well, this landscape is not very promising, but I wanted to share with you what I see as venues for potential solutions, so that we can have a good time for conversation. Well, I think one certainly is focusing on quality journalism. Media organizations need to invest in quality journalism that is accurate, fair, and objective. Number 2, I think, is a very important challenge, promoting media literacy. People need to be educated about how to critically evaluate information and identify misinformation. What is a credible source? The need not to rely on a single source, things like that. This is very important in the digital landscape, because as a friend of mine uses to say with an expression that I think is very good, in the digital landscape, everybody is a journalist, but there is a scarcity of editors. Number 3, building stronger relationships between journalists and their audiences. Media organizations need to be more transparent and accountable to their audiences. If media companies want to regain their lost trust, they must regain the ability to follow their audiences, understand their needs in depth, respond to their comments, and encourage their participation. One of our problems is what I would call a relevance gap. Somehow the media concerns and the audience concerns are not quite matching that well. And very often we have thought that we were like a group of superior people that should tell the audience what to do and what to think. Maybe that should change. Number 4, we have to explore innovative business models. Media organizations need to find new ways to generate the revenues that support quality journalism. Needless to say, you only pay when you trust and when you offer something unique that you can get easily elsewhere. The tendency to increase subscriptions shown by Netflix or Spotify or Amazon, but also the Financial Times, The Economist, New York Times, or Bloomberg, will increase the need for trust in the coming years. We need subscribers, but in order to get subscribers, we really need to work on trust. And 5, addressing talent and culture. Media companies need to create a more positive and supportive work environment for their employees. I want to see our journalism students wanting to work in the journalism industry. Now, many of our students want to leave the industry if they have an opportunity. We have a big problem with that. This includes, I think, offering competitive salaries and benefits, providing opportunities for training and professional development, and promoting a healthy work-life balance. I have done a lot of work when I work with my media management program with companies, and I have a very hard time getting their commitment for training and development of their employees. And that's a pity. It doesn't happen in every industry, but it seems to me a really important malaise of our industry. So let's face it, part of our crisis is a crisis of talent. We are not as attractive as an industry as we used to be. Employees will share their talent with companies with more transparent leadership in which they can trust. I think that when Mercedes was making my introduction, I remember a very good book I'm actually reading, and it's a book from last year by Dan Ariely. He's a very well-known scholar. I'm sure many of you know the works of Ariely. And he has this fantastic book called Misbelief, where he explores many of the reasons of this crisis of trust we are discussing here today. Just a very brief conclusion, and then I leave the floor for all your questions and comments, because I see many interesting people and even some friends in the audience, and I'm very glad to see that. I think that restoring trust in the media is essential for a healthy society. By focusing on quality journalism, promoting media literacy, and building stronger relationships between journalists and their audiences, we can help to ensure that the media remains a vital source of information and a pillar of our democracy. Many thanks to all for your kind attention. And now looking forward to all your comments and questions and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiko. I was just reading what the EI has summarized from your talk. That's very interesting. Anyway, so I'm sure there are some comments, questions, criticism from the audience. Ellie, please. We can't hear you. You are muted.
Let me prime the pump, break the ice with a question. Is this possibly a self-inflicted wound by media themselves, which is when there were few of them, there were more in an oligopolistic type arrangement, and you would not speak ill of other media companies. CBS News would not say ABC News is wrong. But now in a competitive environment, they kind of almost gleefully fight each other and point to where they are wrong in order to raise their own ratings. Similarly, so there's a kind of like what economists call the tragedy of the commons type situation. People collectively reduce their industry's reputation. Secondly, journalism schools themselves, the next generation of journalists. At Columbia, which has a very good journalism school, the dean kind of came out quite publicly by saying that there is no such thing as objective journalism. It's all oriented and has to be dedicated to some justice goals and some societal goals. And newspapers, in fact, have kind of started to, reflected a much greater blurring of the line between opinion pieces, editorial articles, and fact reporting. It's kind of all being done together. And on the online journalism is not really journalism. You said there are journalists, but there are no editors. I would kind of add to that, maybe they're no real journalists. They're all editorial writers. Everybody has very strong opinions, but nobody is really doing very hard work on kind of bringing out those facts in that journalistic way. And so, to conclude, I think that the profession of journalism itself and the industry itself are largely to blame for the problem.
Yeah, well, this is not an answer, just some thoughts that occurred to me after listening to your point, which I think is very interesting and true. I think there is a lot of self-inflection in the ills of the industry. I think that also the industry has become very catastrophic, talking about its own. So really, we have these wars among media, but also we have like this bad news about the industry that are shared by everybody in the industry. So it has become a very pessimistic industry. We don't have hope for the future, and that's also we should be fixing. We should be able more to speak as a sector and have a better opinion of ourselves, and to some extent support ourselves more. But you make a very good point, and it is true that the field, when media, as you say with a very good expression, as media are not scarce anymore, we have a new situation where some of the walls that were maybe protecting ourselves are not doing so any longer. So that's so I think that we have to work along those lines.
Thank you.
Mercedes, I can't raise my hand, but is it all right if I ask a question?
Mercedes?
Yes. I was just thinking, Kiko, we have said, I'm sorry, there's other hand, so please go on and I'll come back later on. Bill.
We don't listen to you, Bill.
Sorry, I was just saying, I don't want to jump the line that Jason had raised his hand.
It's Bill Dutton first.
Well,
Yeah. Bill Dutton, sorry.
Okay, I thought somebody else asked before me, but anyway, let me go ahead. I'm just both Ellie and yourself, Francisco, are talking about the media as some kind of unified object. And this study I'm doing of you trust in the media in Ukraine it really illustrates that, people trust one media versus another. And there are multiple media and they really have varied opinions about, and you could see during the war, they're losing trust in traditional media and increasingly trusting search and social media because they can select their own. They have less concern over censorship and so forth. But there's a lot, very diverse levels of trust across different media. That might be a good thing, like in the Ukraine context. But the other thing, the one point I would pick with you is that you seem to think that people will try to develop trust in order to generate more subscriptions. And I think it's exactly the opposite. I'm really worried that the push towards paid subscription and paywalls is one of the major forces beyond in terms of the polarization and the partisan nature of the media. They really have to identify a niche audience and in order to get people to pay for their media. And I like the Fox News model in the United States is becoming a model for almost all the media and of various stripes. Anyway, just maybe you could react to that.
Yeah, very good points, Bill. Thank you. I think that you're right. When we speak about media in general, in a way we blur realities that are very diverse, and that's very important. So, but really, I'm looking in the type of figures about trust that are being reported by institutions like the Digital News Report, Oxford University, in different years, the Edelman Trust Report, which is also a reference for the study of trust. Also, we see figures like that in other research institutions all over the world. So there is a pretty wide consensus about this crisis of trust in the media. But having said that, your point is very important because we find people that have a lot of trust in some media and maybe not in others. So that's a very fair point. Regarding subscriptions, I think that our decision to pay is somewhat related to quality. It might not be fully related to a non-partisan journalistic arena, so to say. But I think it's also fair to say that when we trust a company enough to commit to a significant payment, in a world where we haven't been used to subscribe, or at least not as often as in other fields, I think that that's an indication that even having its own ideology or being in a part of the spectrum politically, that particular media company is a more serious one than others. So I think that at least you can take loyalty, the loyalty that is always present in subscriptions to some extent, as an indication that that particular media outlet has a degree of quality, at least some degree. So, but I see your concern, which is very valid, and I think you also make a very important point and have taken note, because I think that is something worth looking more into. We also had Jason, I think, that wanted to say something before we continue with the other bill.
Okay. So Jason.
So the question I have for you, Francisco, is basically artificial intelligence is coming in, creating all this new technology. You're now able to have generated videos that look real, all that. So my question to you is, trust in media is already being eroded. How do you see the media and news in general handling what I would refer to as a post-truth era, right? When I can now create videos, pictures, and whatever, backing up my claims. So if I want to say that, Ellie was seen drowning puppies at a local shelter the other day, I can actually make a video of him doing that and say, here's the video evidence of this happening. And so I'm very curious, how should the news and how should the media and journalists in general react to this? How do they go about verifying information when, anything could be created or, shown to back up that information?
Great, Jason. I was really looking forward for someone to speak about AI because it's a very, very important issue for all of us today. I think that I have had a deliberately slow approach to research on AI because I happen to think that we are very early in the game. We're already seeing a lot of things that are very important happening. For example, I was reading today in an Axios report, somebody's testing figures about how generative AI is replacing search. So search becoming, search in searchers conventionally becoming sort of a legacy business. So we're not talking just about legacy media, but about legacy search, which I thought it was fascinating to think about. So I think that what you talk about is really our very impressive challenge to media literacy that we have today, because we're going to need to equip our audiences and ourselves with very good capabilities to recognize anything that can be really manipulative or propagandistic, false, outright false. So we live in that world. I don't have a good answer to that yet, because as I'm telling you, I think we're still early on the game, but I think it's very important to keep studying those things and see what we can do. You see how, for example, already AI is making itself very much present through news summaries in a lot of companies. And now, to a large extent, is going to replace a lot of news content. Fortunately, not opinion, but anything that is information is going to be is already being very much replaced by AI. So something worth keeping in mind, doing research on, but in my opinion, still early in the game. So I just shared some thoughts. So I think we had Bill Drake.
Sure. Thanks, Francisco. That was a interesting presentation that teed up a lot of important issues and hence the good conversation that follows. You listed a number of macro level kind of systemic forces that have helped to drive down trust, and it seems fair to say all those have been part of the puzzle. But I would suggest that perhaps we need to center a somewhat less scholarly and more obvious point that I don't think is well captured by the generic label of political polarization, which is that in the U.S. at least, and I think this is true in some other places as well, a big driver has been the long-term strategy of a very well-organized and well-funded networked right-wing movement to delegitimate all sources of information other than those that they favor. And that has a long history in the United States, going back to really the 19th century. But of course, in recent decades, from talk radio in the 80s through the rise of Fox and other kinds of media systems and the growth of the social media and so on, this has all turbocharged it. And it's, of course, part of it. We all know everything I'm saying. I'm not saying anything not obvious. And it's all part of a larger effort to delegitimate public institutions and sources of expertise, science, and so on, that are oppositional to their political objectives. And the same kind of playbook is being run in other countries. So So I think, you know, not talking about that can make the conversation a little bit bloodless. And the actions that you suggest for starting to rebuild trust are surely all important, but I don't see how they really address this strategic approach, or offer the prospect of getting back, e.g., kind of the MAGA faithful in the United States to begin trusting mainstream media again. I mean, I think a large chunk of America anyway is just gone in terms of ever trusting mainstream media other than the sources that we're all familiar with. So it just seems to me that that political dimension has to be sort of part of the conversation a little bit more fulsomely than maybe it has been. Anyway, as I say, I think I'm making an obvious point, but I think it's worth centering.
No. I really like it. I think it's very important. And actually, I also take a note to think about it. The fact that part of that polarization can be something deliberately fostered and looked for, and by different ideological forces. You know that, and I don't see a clear solution for that. In Europe, we have a lot of talk in the last couple of years about the European Media Freedom Act, which is an effort by the European Union that gives governments and the EU some capability to police misinformation in the EU. Of course, having that capability in the hands of governments is not entirely free of controversy. So it's something that, at least in Europe, we have a very good conversation about how we build controls that are not government controls. I think it's a very interesting area to do research and to think about. And also, I think that a sector that could be really rich and with good ties between themselves and with deep relationships could be a very good force to promote that kind of non-partisan content. But even we do it ourselves, or we need the help of government, but the help of government is always something very dangerous. So thank you for your point, because I think it made me think about a number of issues that we can also discuss here. I see a great friend of mine from Brazil with his hand up. So.
Hi, Francisco. Thank you very
Hello.
much for your, yeah. May I?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Francisco. And if I may, I would like to bring again this question about how journalism organizations are dealing with this trust erosion and the ways that they are trying to communicate their standards, their editorial publishing standards to their readers. So some, I can say, many journalistic organizations are investing in enhanced ways to communicate how they process news and what are their publishing standards through trust indicators and signals that are capable of differentiating editorial content from paid content, or making authorship more visible, or investing in stronger correction policies and things like that. But we are not quite sure how the readers respond to that. And there is a particular issue about the transparency used to communicate how newsrooms are using AI in the newsmaking process. Some say that if you communicate clearly that you are using AI to translate texts or to streamline some news process, that can be a way to enhance trust. But there may be a paradox here, and maybe readers will be less confident in their news organizations once they are aware that the newsroom is using AI. So could you please comment a little bit on this trust indicators approach to regain confidence between newsrooms and their audience?
Yeah, I think, Francisco, wonderful point. I think that I assume that editorial publishing standards are very good. And you made a very important point, which is we have to see what is the audience response to that. And maybe part of it is incorporating the audience in the process. Because sometimes we have not been able to do that. I think one of the difficulties we have, that is a very important one, is that media is often consumed without any context. And we see how our younger readers, really they read media content like they go to Spotify to find a song. So they are very vulnerable to catchy headlines that appear on the sources they usually go to for information. And they really don't commit to a single source. They are nitpicking here and there. And so it's a very difficult audience to be dealing with. But my impression is that good, transparent editorial publishing standards are going to be a help for serious journalism, no matter how you define that. And I think that there are very good examples. Certainly have some in Spain, and I see many others all over the world. So I think that that's a very good route to follow. But we will need to be able to incorporate the audience to those efforts, and I think that's going to take some work, and also maybe sometimes they have to be a part of the efforts in a very direct way, through panels or through specific participation. But thank you, because we didn't cover editorial publishing standards, and that's a very important topic. We have Bill again, I think.
Yeah. If I may, I'd just like you to, first of all, I think that this notion of disinformation is often tied to the media, the internet or the media, as somehow distorting the reality of what's said. And a typical I'm living in the UK, and every time there's a speech or a talk or an interview with Donald Trump, the media follow it with fact checks. He lied about this. He didn't. This is not true. He is the source of disinformation and not the media. And I'm thinking somehow disinformation is by media scholars. Well, of course we do that. We're focusing so much on the media, but we need to. I mean, if Trump is getting misinformed by other political leaders and politicians, probably, or the media. He says, I saw this on TV, but he's becoming an opinion leader that we don't necessarily count in our studies of disinformation, or do you? I guess that's my question. How do you do that?
Great point. I think that we have a big issue with politicians, because very often the carriers of misinformation certainly are politicians. And so I was focusing on the industry, and because my talk was on the industry, but certainly we should be talking about politics, because we also have a very sick political arena in general in many Western countries, I think, and of course also in many others. And I know you are very expert on that. I think that maybe one of the things we should do is doing a less political type of journalism, because if we are so political, very often we are in hands of politicians, which is very sometimes it causes some problems. Also, I think that, but I think that you raise a great point. We should bring the issue of disinformation a little bit more to other social platforms, and not just focus on the media. And that's of course a very valid point. I think that also one of the things we could do to regain trust is bring experts closer to the audience. Sometimes we could do a better work in bringing the really knowledgeable people to the arena to discuss the important issues. And today we have many experts, and it is true that media has always been using experts, but that's something that I think could be very interesting. It's a very interesting line of work. So to your credit, very good point. And of course, we have to look also in other places and not just in the media.
I cannot raise the hands, so
Yeah,
it's fine.
that's done.
Yeah, okay. Well, technically, I just, for a number of reasons, I can't raise the hands electronically here, so I have to speak directly. First of all, I really would like to thank Francisco for very good and detailed lecture. We have spoken many times for the last couple of years on media economics, media management, media business themes. And didn't pay much attention about something that is very important, and that's actually public trust. But I would just like to make a note, and also this is a question for Francisco if he finds that interesting to reply, is the fact that I think it's a little bit naive to believe that particularly the owners of the most important and most concentrated large media are very much concerned about public trust as much as academia discusses it almost on a daily basis. We are dealing now with individuals who are multi-billionaires, something like Elon Musk and maybe 10 or 15 of other individuals. They have more money than the GDP of large countries such as perhaps Portugal, Spain, Colombia, Mexico, or something. And I find it very naive that they would be very much concerned about public trust. I noticed also for the last couple of years that those individuals who discuss the issue of public trust are mostly in academia, a little bit in journalism, middle class, and some portion of upper class. Take into consideration that media concentration is just tremendous, and every year we have actually more and more powerful media in the hands of less and less entrepreneurs. Would you say that we are actually very disadvantaged at this point in order to improve the public trust, or vice versa? So I just, if you want to reply, it's a complex question, but this media concentration really, I think, makes impact on public trust. What is your opinion? I'm sure you have you read a lot and wrote many articles on this issue.
Yes, and thank you for your question. And also it is great to see you. Let me just a few thoughts on what you said, which I think is very thought-provoking. For example, today we live in a world where Amazon is the second producer of broadcasting content, and that's a very tiny part of their business, as you know, because they live by other things, and actually they lose a little bit of money on that, but they are so powerful that they have these capabilities to influence also the streaming arena in this particular case. I think that I would somewhat balance what you say by saying that I see trust as a major issue for branding. Any brand, whether it is commercial or it is an organization, lives by trust. And I would say that today most organizations are having to some degree trust issues. I think that, of course, a multi-billionaire could be less concerned by that, but even multi-billionaires, as you can see today with Elon Musk. Now Elon Musk, his concern is that people are burning Teslas, in many countries of the world. So the issue with trust is really becoming a business issue to him in this particular case. So I'm not sure even great media moguls and great media owners can disengage completely with a decline of trust in their companies. But of course, the advantage for large companies in our sector is very significant. So probably they have less motives to concern than others. But let me say that I think that trust is becoming an issue for all kinds of polarizations in our world. But of course, your point is much larger and it's a very interesting one.
Just to add a question that I had from the beginning, and it's very much related to the one of Svestan. That's the business of media, of media news. I mean, for many years, I was defended that news media has to be a business. They are companies, they are organizations, but what about the business? I think that's one of the problems of news. It's very difficult to have this goal to increase your revenues, to get profits, and to do a good journalism. So what do you think about it? Do you think that...
Oh, yeah, great point, Mercedes. I mean, what I think is that let me put it this way. I'm not sure I'm going to be completely accurate, but for the sake of the conversation we're having here, I think that for media, the market, it is necessary, but it is not enough. So we are a very unique type of business, and in a way, a unique balance of creativity, business, and social responsibility. So I think that what is unique about us is this particular mix, where of course we need the revenues, but we also are fulfilling really a social need. And we do that with persons that need to be growing in doing their work. So this is a very unique mix that I think is different to the mix of the other industries. I'm not saying it is better, but I think it's really different. And it's something that you also need to take into consideration. In my opinion, media need to be profitable, but that's not enough. They need something else. So I don't know if that answered to some degree your question, but I think that's my thought on what you said.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's definitely, we have to think in other ways to manage
categories, other, yeah.
Another ways to funding news media, actually.
To fund, certainly.
You said the market is not enough. So we are almost getting 5, 6 in here, probably 12 there. Ellie, would you like to finish with some final thoughts?
Well, thank you very much, Mercedes and Francisco and audience and Jason for organizing it. I would also all like to thank all of us for this really interesting discussion. And it raises in my mind the question as a final thought. Trust is not only an issue in media. Trust issues pervade society, and an erosion of trust also pervades society, whether it's trust in politicians, whether it's trust in government, whether it's, let's say, trust issues exist in financial services, and they have somehow found arrangements to deal with that. Trust issues pervaded a discussion in computer science, and they have explored ways in which computer systems can trust each other and how to deal with untrustworthy ones. And trust issues are everywhere. If you go to a restaurant, you have to trust the chef. When you send your kids to school, you have to trust the educational system. And so the question in my mind is perhaps all of these institutions have seen an erosion, and they have all dealt with it in some ways, perfect or imperfectly. Is there something that we can learn from other non-media activities in trying to protect and increase trust? What have been the arrangements, and can we learn from it in the media world? So that's my final thought, and maybe Francisco wants to address that, how we establish trust, because it seems to me that in a way it's kind of one of those things where distrust is contagious, but trust is also contagious. When people trust you, you kind of have, in some ways, repay them with some trust. And it's the same thing perhaps here too. What do you think, Francisco, as a final word? Sound.
Thank you. You reminded me of Dan Ariely, who he speaks about this concept of the spiral of declining trust. So I think that in the same way that trust could be like a vicious circle, we could create a virtuous circle, and that's very interesting. You also remind me of a book I'm taking a look to that came out recently. I'm sure most of you know it already. It's called Careless People by the former senior global policy director of Meta, talking about the company, which is a really an explosive book. As a matter of fact, Meta tried to block the publication, and it tells you how the lack of trust is widespread in many other industries. So to your point, the crisis of trust is a larger crisis, and that's why it's a worth exploring topic in many fields. So thank you all for your attention and for all your very interesting questions. And I hope to see you again at some point.
Thank you so much, Francisco. Thank you. And Mercedes, thank you too.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. See you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you so much.